I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't raise my voice, and I definitely didn't start a feud, but I did make sure my neighbor's brand new garage became completely useless. And the worst part is, they saw it coming and still didn't think I'd actually go through with it. That's probably what gets me the most, not what they did, but how casually they assumed I'd just live with it like it didn't matter, like my space, my property. My daily life was something negotiable. I've lived in that house just outside of Cedar Ridge for almost a decade now. Nothing fancy, just a quiet corner lot with a long gravel driveway that runs clean along the side of the house, wide enough for trucks, trailers, whatever I needed, and more importantly, it was mine, clearly defined, properly recorded, no confusion, no overlap, no drama, the kind of setup you don't think about because it just works. My old neighbor, Mr. Halvorson, he understood that without a word needing to be said, we had this unspoken agreement. You stay on your side, I stay on mine, and everything stays peaceful, which is honestly all I ever wanted. Then he sold the place, and things changed faster than I expected. The new owners, the Carters, moved in during early spring, and at first, I'll give them credit, they were friendly enough, waved when they saw me, came over one afternoon with a six-pack, introduced themselves, Travis and Megan, mid-30s, 2 kids, trying to settle in. Nothing about them screamed trouble. If anything, they felt like the kind of neighbors you'd occasionally chat with over the fence about weather or yard work. But that didn't last long. About 3 weeks in, I noticed a delivery truck pulling up with lumber, long beams, stacks of plywood, and I figured, okay, maybe they're adding a shed or extending the existing garage. Totally normal. Except the next morning, I walked out with my coffee, looked over, and something fell off. Not wrong exactly, just closer than it should have been. At first, I told myself it was perspective. You know how angles can mess with you when something new gets built, especially on a property line, so I didn't jump to conclusions, I just kept an eye on it, watched as the frame went up, piece by piece, and each day it crept a little further into my line of sight, a little further into my space, until one morning, backing my SUV out like I'd done 1,000 times before, I had to slam the brakes because my side mirror came within inches of one of their support posts, and that's when that quiet little voice in the back of my head stopped being quiet and said, no, something's not right here. I stepped out, stood there for a second, really looking this time, not casually, not politely, but critically, and what I saw made my stomach drop just a bit. The structure wasn't just near my driveway. It was leaning into it, not physically tilted, but positioned in a way that didn't make sense unless someone had misjudged the boundary or ignored it. I walked over that afternoon while Travis was outside, hammer in hand, and I kept it calm, friendly, no accusations, just, hey man, quick question, this new garage, do you know exactly where the property line sits between us? And he barely even paused, just laughed a little, and said, yeah, contractor handled all that. We're good, everything's measured out. That answer didn't sit right with me, not because it was defensive, but because it was dismissive, like the question itself wasn't worth thinking about. So I pushed just a little, asked if they had a survey done, something official, and that's when he shrugged and said, it's only a few feet either way, you've still got room to drive, right? And there it was, that sentence, casual, almost joking, but loaded with assumption, that a few feet of my property didn't really count. I didn't argue, didn't escalate. I just nodded, said okay, and walked back to my place. But inside, something had shifted, because it wasn't about inches or feet anymore. It was about the fact that he had already decided what was acceptable for me, without me. That night, I pulled out my property documents, the original survey from when I bought the house, and I stared at those lines longer than I'd like to admit, tracing them with my finger, trying to match paper to reality. And the more I looked, the more certain I became that what I was seeing outside didn't match what was supposed to be there. Still, I didn't want to be the guy who overreacts, so I gave it one more day, watched the crew finish up the roof, watched as the overhang extended outward, casting a shadow that definitely wasn't falling where it should have, and by the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I called in a professional surveyor. If there was going to be a conversation, it was going to be based on facts, not guesses, not feelings, not someone's contractor saying, trust me. When the surveyor showed up, he didn't say much, just got to work, measuring, marking, placing those bright red stakes into the ground with this quiet precision that felt more final than anything Travis had said, and I stood there watching, arms crossed, heart steady but heavy, because part of me already knew what he was going to find. I just needed to see it confirmed. By the time he finished, the line was clear, undeniable, a straight path of red markers cutting through the space where their brand new garage now stood, and not just brushing against it, but crossing into it, cleanly, significantly, like it had no business being there at all. He handed me the report, and I didn't even need to read all of it to understand the impact. The corner of their garage was sitting about 4 feet onto my driveway easement, and the roof overhang stretched even further, close to 5 feet into my property. Not a rounding error, not a misunderstanding, a full-on encroachment. I thanked him, paid the invoice, and stood there alone for a while after he left, looking at those red stakes like they were dividing more than just land, like they were marking the moment things stopped being neighborly and started becoming something else entirely. I took a full day before doing anything with that report, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure I wasn't acting out of frustration or pride, because once you cross that line with neighbors, there's no easy way back, and I'd seen enough small disputes turn into years of bitterness to know better than to rush it. But the more I walked that driveway, the more real the problem became. Like it wasn't just a line on paper anymore. It was physical, present, unavoidable, my truck barely clearing the edge, my trailer completely out of the question, and the idea of just making it work started to feel less like compromise and more like slowly giving up something that was never theirs to take. So the next morning, I printed everything out, clean copies, photos, measurements, the survey map with the red boundary clearly marked, and I walked over to their place, same calm approach as before, knocked on the door, and when Travis opened it, I handed him the papers without any build-up, just said, "Hey, I had the property surveyed, and there's an issue we need to look at." He didn't even step outside, just glanced down at the top page, barely 2 seconds, then looked back at me like I'd handed him a receipt he didn't ask for, and said, "Yeah, I mean, tearing that down would be a huge cost, man." Like that was the end of the discussion. I stood there for a second, waiting for something more, maybe a question, maybe a hint that he actually understood what I was showing him. But instead he leaned against the doorframe and added, "You've still got space to get through, right?" Same tone, same assumption, like we were talking about shifting a fence post, not a permanent structure sitting on someone else's land. I felt that same shift again, but stronger this time, not anger exactly, more like clarity, like something had clicked into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a decision they had already made, and they were counting on me to just go along with it. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I just said, "Take a closer look at the report when you have time," and walked away. 3 days went by, nothing, no knock, no message, no attempt to talk it through, just silence, like ignoring it might somehow make it less real. And during those 3 days, I tested every inch of that driveway, tried backing in at different angles, measured clearances, even asked a buddy of mine, Greg, to bring his pickup over, a wider model than mine, just to see what would happen. And it was worse than I thought. He couldn't even make the turn without cutting across the space now blocked by that overhang. And at one point he just stopped, rolled down the window, and said, "Man, they really screwed you on this one." And I remember just nodding, because there wasn't really anything else to say. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I started going deeper, not just at my property records, but local ordinances, easement rights, access laws, the kind of stuff most people never bother reading unless they absolutely have to. And the more I read, the more something started forming in my head. Not revenge, not even confrontation, but a solution, something simple, legal, and impossible to argue with. It took me a couple days to confirm everything, made a few calls, talked to a guy at the county office who explained the specifics of maintaining unobstructed access to a legal driveway. And that's when it all locked in, because technically, I had every right to ensure that any structure above my driveway clearance didn't interfere with safe vehicle access, and their overhang definitely did. The idea felt almost too clean, like it didn't rely on them agreeing or understanding or even admitting fault. It just existed within the rules. So I made a call. The following week, early morning, around 8 a.m., a metalwork crew pulled up in front of my house, flatbed truck, welding equipment, steel posts, and I could already feel the shift in the air before anything even started, because people notice when something unusual is about to happen in a quiet neighborhood like ours. I stepped outside, coffee in hand again. Same spot I'd stood weeks earlier, but this time there was no uncertainty, just focus. The crew got to work immediately, marking 2 points at the entrance of my driveway, right where it meets the road, digging deep holes with this steady mechanical rhythm that echoed a little louder than usual. And it didn't take long for Travis and Megan to come outside, both of them standing near the edge of their lawn, watching, confused at first, then clearly concerned. Travis walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans, trying to keep that same casual tone, but it was thinner now, less confident, and he asked, "Hey, what's all this? What are you putting in?" I looked at him, calm, steady, no edge in my voice, and said, "I'm installing a vehicle height clearance bar, just making sure my driveway access stays protected." You could see the moment it didn't quite register yet, like the words made sense individually but not together, and he glanced at the crew, then back at me, and said, "Okay, but why now?" I didn't hesitate, just said, "Because right now, there's a structure extending over my driveway that creates a clearance issue, and I'm fixing that on my side." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then stopped, probably realizing there wasn't an easy angle to push back from, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything, just stood there as the crew set the steel posts into the ground, pouring concrete, securing them in place with a precision that made it clear this wasn't temporary. Megan stepped closer at that point, arms crossed, quieter than him but sharper in her tone, and said, "You're seriously putting up a bar across your own driveway?" And I nodded, said, "Yeah, at 7 feet, which is well within safe clearance for my vehicles." She glanced back at the garage, then at the space between the posts, and I could almost see the math happening in her head, the realization starting to form, but not fully landing yet. And that's when one of the workers lifted the long black steel beam into position, aligning it carefully before securing it across the top. The sound it made when it locked into place, it was solid, final, not loud, but definite, like a period at the end of a sentence. I stepped back a little as they tightened everything, checked the height, made small adjustments, and then just like that, it was done, a clean, straight bar stretching across the entrance of my driveway. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive, just there. I walked over to my SUV, got in, started it up, and without saying a word, drove forward slowly, passing under the bar with plenty of space to spare, no issue at all, exactly as planned. And when I stopped on the other side and looked back, Travis was standing there, staring at that same space. But now his attention had shifted upward, toward the part of his garage that extended over my driveway, the section that didn't quite clear that 7-foot line. That's when it hit him. You could see it, the exact second everything connected, the angle, the height, the turning path required to actually get a vehicle into that garage, and how all of it depended on using a portion of my driveway that was no longer accessible in the same way. He didn't say anything at first, just took a few steps back, looking from the bar to the garage, then back again, like he was trying to find a way around it that didn't exist, and I didn't interrupt that moment, because sometimes people need to arrive at the conclusion on their own for it to really stick. Eventually, he looked at me and said, "So, what? You're saying we can't use our garage now?" I shrugged slightly, not dismissive, just honest, and said, "I'm saying I've secured my driveway access within my property line. What happens beyond that depends on whether anything's in the way." That was the first time his expression changed from confusion to something heavier, not quite anger, not yet, but the beginning of it, mixed with realization, because for the first time, the consequences of what they'd built weren't theoretical anymore. They were right there, fixed in steel and concrete. Megan didn't say a word, but she kept staring at that overhang like it had just betrayed her, like it wasn't supposed to be a problem, and now suddenly it was the only thing that mattered. The crew packed up not long after that, tools loaded back onto the truck, a quick nod from the foreman as they pulled away, leaving the three of us standing there in a silence that felt a lot louder than any argument could have been. And as I turned to head back inside, I could feel it settling in, not just for them, but for me too. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about consequences finally catching up to a decision that should have never been made in the first place. For the first couple days after that bar went up, nothing really happened on the surface, no confrontation, no shouting, no late-night knocks on my door, just this quiet, almost uncomfortable stillness that settled over the space between our houses. like both sides were waiting to see what the other would do next. And I'll be honest, part of me expected things to escalate fast. Maybe a complaint, maybe someone trying to challenge it. But instead it played out slower, heavier, like the weight of the situation needed time to fully sink in. I started noticing small things first. Travis standing in his driveway longer than usual, just looking at the garage, not doing anything, just staring like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't have a clean solution anymore. And Megan, she stopped waving entirely, not out of anger exactly, more like distance, like she didn't want to engage with something she couldn't fix. A few days in, I saw them try to pull their SUV into the garage for the first time since everything was finished, and that moment right there, it said more than any argument ever could. Travis lined it up carefully, slower than usual, adjusting the angle, inching forward, then stopping, reversing, trying again from a slightly different approach, and every time, the same issue. The turning angle forced him toward my driveway, and the overhang above that section sat just low enough that if he pushed it, he'd risk scraping the roof or worse, and you could see the hesitation in his movements. That moment where pride meets reality and neither one wins clean. He got out eventually, shut the door harder than he needed to, walked around the car once, then just stood there with his hands on his hips, looking up at that overhang like it had personally betrayed him, and I stayed inside, watching through the window, not out of satisfaction exactly, but something close, not revenge, just a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences, even when people try to pretend they don't. Over the next week, it became obvious that the garage wasn't functioning the way they'd planned. They started using it for storage instead, boxes, tools, random stuff that didn't require precision or clearance. But every time I saw it, I knew that wasn't the point of building it, and they knew it too. One afternoon, I ran into Megan near the mailbox. First time we'd been that close since everything happened, and she hesitated before speaking, like she was choosing her words carefully, then said, "We didn't think it would turn into this," and I nodded, because I believed her, at least partially. I don't think they set out to create a problem, but at some point along the way, they chose convenience over correctness, and that choice caught up with them. I told her I didn't want it to turn into this either, but it didn't feel like I had much of a choice once the structure was up. She didn't argue, just gave a small nod and walked back toward the house, and that was the closest we got to a real conversation before things shifted again. About 2 weeks after the installation, there was a knock on my door, not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate, and when I opened it, Travis was standing there, alone this time. No casual attitude, no half-smile, just a kind of tired seriousness that hadn't been there before. He held his hands together for a second, like he was organizing his thoughts, then looked at me and said, "Can we talk?" And I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, gave him my full attention, because whatever this was, it felt different. He took a breath, glanced briefly toward the garage, then back at me, and said, "We've been going over this, and yeah, we messed up." There was no defense in his voice, no attempt to soften it, just a straightforward admission that probably took more effort than it sounded like, and I respected that, even if it came late. He continued, said, "The contractor rushed things, we didn't double-check the survey, and by the time we realized it might be off, it was already framed out, and we figured it wasn't a big enough issue to redo." He paused there, almost like he was replaying that decision in his head, then added, "Clearly, we were wrong." I didn't interrupt, just let him finish, because this wasn't about me winning anything. It was about getting to a point where the situation could actually be resolved. He looked at the clearance bar, then back at me, and asked, "If we fix it, if we move the garage fully back onto our side, would you take that down?" It wasn't a complicated question, but it carried weight, because now the responsibility had shifted back to them, where it should have been from the start. I thought about it for a second, not because I didn't know my answer, but because I wanted to be clear, fair, and final, and then I said, "If the structure is completely off my property, no overhang, no encroachment at all, yeah, I'll remove the bar." No hesitation, no conditions beyond that, just a clean resolution. He nodded immediately, like he'd already expected that answer, and said, "Okay, we'll take care of it." And just like that, the tension that had been sitting between us for weeks didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became something more manageable, more grounded, because now there was a path forward that didn't involve ignoring the problem or working around it, but actually fixing it. Over the next month, I watched as they went through the process the right way this time. Permits, measurements, adjustments, and eventually, the partial teardown of that section of the garage that had crossed the line. It wasn't quick, and it definitely wasn't cheap, but it was necessary. And for the first time since all of this started, everything began to align the way it should have from day one. The day they finished, Travis came over again, gave me a simple nod, said, "It's clear now, you can check it if you want," and I did, walked the line, looked at the spacing, made sure there was no overhang crossing into my side, and when I was satisfied, I told him, "I'll have the bar taken down this week." No celebration, no handshake moment like in the movies, just a quiet understanding that things had been corrected. When the crew came back to remove the bar, it felt different from the day they installed it, lighter somehow, like the job had served its purpose and didn't need to stay any longer. And as that black beam came down, piece by piece, I realized something I hadn't really thought about before. This whole situation could have been avoided with a single decision early on, just choosing to respect a boundary instead of testing it. After that, things between us settled into something neutral, not friendly like in the beginning, but not hostile either, more like two people who learned something the hard way and decided not to repeat it. We still keep our distance, still don't talk much, but there's a kind of quiet respect now that wasn't there before, built not on goodwill, but on understanding exactly where the lines are literally and otherwise. And every once in a while, when I pull into that driveway, no obstacles, no awkward angles, just a clean, open path the way it was always meant to be, I think about how easily it could have gone the other way, how a small decision left unchecked can turn into something much bigger, something that forces people into corners they didn't expect to be in. So yeah, I didn't sue them, I didn't yell, I didn't escalate things the way most people probably would have, but I also didn't give up what was mine, and in the end, that made all the difference. Now I'm curious what you think. If you were in that situation, would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have taken it further, dropped a lawsuit, demanded compensation, maybe even forced it legally from the start? Or do you think putting up that bar crossed a line in its own way? Let me know, because honestly, I've heard both sides, and I'm still not sure everyone would agree on where the line should have been drawn.